This video is going to cover the topic of writing comparison statements. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question for this video is how can we analyze and create statements from data? When we see data presented to us, we need to have the ability to analyze the information. We can do that with the following: ratios, percents, differences, and fractions. To see an example of this, let's take a look at some data from Portland and from around the world showing the height of various buildings. I've chosen 7 buildings here to share with you, 4 of which are from right here in Portland, and 3 are some of the tallest buildings in the world. And I've recorded their height right here and the number of stories in each building so that we can compare. I've picked 2 buildings to compare one-on-one. We have here the Burj Khalifa, which is in Dubai in the Middle East. And then I have that's the tallest building in the entire world. And then I have the Wells Fargo building from here in Portland, and that's the largest building in our city, in Portland. So we're going to be looking specifically at the data for Wells Fargo and for the Burj Khalifa to compare the information that we see here. The Wells Fargo building we see is 546 feet with 41 floors or stories, and the Burj Khalifa is 2,717 feet with 163 stories. I'm going to start by comparing the number of floors or stories here between the Wells Fargo and the Burj Khalifa. And I'm going to use a ratio to do that. So I've written here that the ratio of floors in the Burj Khalifa to Wells Fargo is 163 to 41. But I want to see if I can make that more manageable, to simplify those numbers to make them easier to visualize and understand. The first thing I've noticed is that 41 times 4 is actually 164, which is really close to the number of floors that the Burj Khalifa has. So I'm going to simplify my ratio a little bit. So instead of 163 to 41, I'm going to actually divide both of these by 41. And if I do that, I'm going to round just a little bit here, but 163 divided by 41 is just about 4. And of course, 41 divided by 41 is 1. So the ratio is about 4 to 1, something that's much easier for me to picture and see. I've compared this data here, writing a statement using ratios. So my statement was the ratio of floors in the Burj Khalifa to Wells Fargo is 4 to 1. I'm going to look at the data again and this time see if I can use a percent to describe the differences between these 2 buildings. And let's go this time by using the height instead of the number of stories. So the Burj Khalifa is 2,717 feet and the Wells Fargo building is 546 feet. Right? It's clear already that the Burj Khalifa is more than twice the size of our tallest building, Wells Fargo. Right? Wells Fargo is clearly less than half the size of the world's tallest building. But I want to look at a percent. So I'm just going to do a couple quick calculations before I come up with my comparison statement. Using percents, I saw the value of what 50% of the Burj Khalifa would be, and that's clearly much taller than our building. 25% of the Burj Khalifa would be about 679 feet, which is still larger than our Wells Fargo. 20% of the height of the Burj Khalifa is 543 4/10 of a foot. That's almost exactly our height. As a result, I can say that the Wells Fargo building is about 20% of the height of the Burj Khalifa. And here now I have written a comparison statement using a percent. So I've done ratios and percents. I can also easily compare these two buildings using differences. All this requires us to do is subtract. I took a look and I subtracted the number of feet from the Wells Fargo building. I subtracted that from the feet of the Burj Khalifa. And I did that also for the number of stories, right? And I was able to see that the Burj Khalifa is 2,171 feet taller than Portland's tallest building, and it has 122 more stories. By writing that comparison, I have used a difference, which is really just subtracting, right? I have used a difference to describe the two buildings and the relationship they have together. And of course, we can also use fractions to compare these two. If I take the number of stories in the Burj Khalifa and divide it by the number of stories in our own building, the Wells Fargo, it ends up being about 4. I'm going to put this little squiggly line because I've had to round just a little bit. That means, of course, that the connection between these two is that the Wells Fargo building has about 1/4 the number of floors as the Burj Khalifa. So in one sense, our tallest building is 1/4 of the size as the world's tallest building. Puts things in perspective a little bit. In this case, this is me using a fraction to compare the two buildings. So we've seen that there are 4 main ways that we compare data, right? The essential question was, how do we make comparison statements using data? We've seen we can use ratios, we can use percents, we can use the difference, we can use fractions. And of course, there are other ways we could phrase this information as well. For example, I could say the Burj Khalifa is 4 times as tall as the Wells Fargo building when we compare the number of stories that they have, right? So there are lots of ways we can compare data, but I just wanted to show you the 4 main ways that we're going to be working with, and we'll have a chance to kind of look through this information a little bit more together in class and try to write our own comparison statements.